Well, welcome to the Dead of Summer Talks. This is the talk series that happens every week that we have school in session mostly. I'm not sure if we even have any more scheduled for the summer right away. We might. They come up. But anyway, it's been a forum where we speak. We have people that are notable members usually of the Silicon Valley that are going to speak about something interesting. We've had everything from the inventor of the microprocessor to the inventor of the Kinect. And at about 2:20, 2:25, we'll end the talk to have questions. But you can ask questions along the way. And when you do, I'll toss you this ball. You can grab that.
Hello.
Thank you very much. And so that's the way we toss the conversation around. And anyway, and then at 2:30, I've been told there might be ice cream. So we'll go out and we'll have some ice cream with Ken. This is Ken Karakotsios. Is that how it's pronounced?
Karakotsios.
Karakotsios. And Ken and I worked together at Lab 126 for a little while.
Where those four guys are from, by the way.
Oh. Well, welcome. Welcome. A great place with lots of very talented people when I was there, and including Ken. And Ken was one of the most energetic engineers I've run into with great vision. Enough vision that he started a company at one point to do analytics, but by the time I was working with him, he wasn't doing big data analysis anymore. He was doing a variety of things that are part of the new mobile world, which he tends to do some of, and he does other things too. But in any case, today he's going to talk about what he doesn't do at Lab 126, which is going to be about some work that he's been doing that has come to fruition in the form of an app that he's disseminating. And so without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to say I've had a lot of fun working with Ted. So I have two microphones going now, right? I've had a lot of fun working with Ted back in the early days of the project that we're all on. Ted helped seed us with some crazy ideas and a very energetic and visionary person. So thanks for inviting me. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is building a sustainable future and how simulation can play a role in that. And I'm going to start with kind of talking about the medium of simulation and the real power of it. I've done a number of things in simulation, different kinds of products and experiments and so on. Then I'm going to talk about an app that I've recently put out there, Footprint USA, which is well, I'll talk more about that as we go. It's basically a model of how we can build a sustainable future and work together and help make changes. I'm going to talk about some of the things I've learned along the way in both building the app and especially in using it and understanding our world a little bit better. Then finish up with some thoughts about ways that we might be able to create the future that we want. And feel free to ask me questions anytime. I'm happy to stop and answer questions. So this talk takes its title from the Occupy Wall Street movement, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And that was a very visible expression of kind of the power imbalance, where individuals were saying, oh, there's these giant corporations and they're controlling everything. Special interests are really driving society, and it's just not fair. It's not what's right for us as individuals. And I have to say that I really, that power imbalance is really resonates with me, and I really feel like their heart was in the right place. But their message was a little lacked a certain actionability, the fact that they didn't really have a specific thing that they were protesting against, and a specific thing that they wanted people to do in a specific way they're organized, et cetera. And that was really the power imbalance really comes from not the fact that big companies or special interest groups have money. It's that they're organized around a cohesive, coherent vision of some place they want to take things. And corporations want to take things where it's good for corporations. Apparently corporations are people. The Supreme Court decided that, and they want to survive and grow and thrive. So they do things to help their self-interests. And that's great. That's what they should be doing. But if we want to provide a countervailing force to that, something that's in our interest, then we need to be coherent and cohesive and not just say that things are screwed up, but have an idea of where we want to go and how we want to get there. The other thing is that this movement was about Wall Street, and at the time that was the problem du jour. I mean, there's a much bigger problem in terms of sustainability, and that's something that I feel really passionate about and have been working on. And essentially, all we have is this thin membrane that covers the planet, and that's what we count on for survival. And we need to find a way to live long-term in harmony with this environment. And it's a problem that is really amenable to solving. There's a lot of technology aspects, and there's also social change aspects that need to happen to help that. And a lot of that is the motivation behind me having created this app, which I'm going to talk about. And I'm not going to dwell on all the sort of, we know what the problems are: climate change, running out of resources, the fact that the population is continuing to increase, and people want more resources to move up into the middle class. I want to focus instead on what we can do as individuals to kind of create the future we want, how we can create this cohesive and coherent vision, how we can create this countervailing force that can let us steer the future to something that provides a high quality of life for people rather than just corporations. And I think simulation can help us get there. It's one tool. There's many, many things that have to happen. But that's my particular passion. I advanced my slide too soon. Before I dive into talking about footprint, I just want to talk about simulation in general, a little bit about some of the things that really make it a powerful technique. I think of simulation as another kind of medium, like video, but interactive and embodying processes. And one of the things that really, as a builder of simulations, one of the things that really makes it powerful is that if you're going to build a model of a system, you have to understand what all the pieces are that go into it. You have to understand how they connect to each other, the behaviors of the systems, and at the edge of the whole model, you have to stub it off with whatever externalities there are. So it really requires you to get your head around the whole system, especially if when you press that run button, it actually does something. Now, you might not know exactly how things are supposed to work and interrelate, but at least it gets you thinking about the system and all the components and how they interact. And that act alone is really, really valuable in trying to understand something. The other really great thing about simulations is that they reveal surprises. And they're sort of the classic kind of surprise in which simulation models can have feedback loops where A influences B and B comes back and influences A, and that can surprise you in some ways. Climate change is a good example of that. I mean, we all kind of understand it now, but it was a surprise at first in terms of putting CO2 in the atmosphere and how that was going to change things. Another way that simulations can surprise us is this area of emergent behavior. So when you build a model of a bunch of individuals and they're interacting, or not even build a model, in the world, when individuals interact, you often they can have local, relatively simple interactions that end up creating large-scale phenomenon that weren't designed into the system. I mean, traffic jams are an example of that, stock markets, evolution. And I've always found that really fascinating. And so I just want to start by showing you an example of emergent behavior, just to kind of help you understand this. This is an app I wrote a few years back when iPhone first came out and all that, which is around the field of cellular automata. I don't know how many people here know that field. Cool, most of you. That's not usually the case. That's great. And so, yeah, so the basic idea of where you have a grid of individual things and they interact with just their close neighbors, and you give them relatively simple rules, and they produce some phenomenon that's global in scale. And sorry, I'm just distracted by what it's doing with my iPad simulator at the moment. It is emergent, yes. Let's see. So this is an example of a particular cellular automaton, which is each pixel is just looking at its neighbors, and each tick of the clock, the pixel influences its neighbors, or it sets its own state based on the state of its neighbors. A very simple rule. I won't go into all the details of it right now, but it's in the family of rules like the game of life and some other things. We get colors because we actually take the history and we kind of encode that in the higher order bits. But what's really interesting is you can go ahead and make a small change to the rules. I'm just going to make something. Later on, I can tell you about all the details behind. Let's see. Look at how to interact with this on a large screen. Well, I'll just pick a different rule. You can change the rules in a simple way. This particular rule here just takes the average of its neighbors, and you get much different behavior. And the really interesting thing about this, and the game of life is kind of the classic thing, is that you get these large-scale structures that, that you can't see that very well, that aren't programmed in anywhere. Here's another example. So again, you just make relatively small changes in the actual underlying rules, and you can get really different behaviors. And sometimes different color palettes can bring those out. So that's one thing that I found very fascinating, is the ability of relatively simple things interacting to produce complex behavior. And again, that can happen with modeling humans or cars in traffic or all sorts of things. Let's see, we'll go back to PowerPoint. Another powerful thing about simulation is it allows you to collaborate in a way that really wasn't possible. It was very difficult to do otherwise. When we think about the world, we have these mental models of how things work, and they're stuck in our heads. And simulations give us a chance to take these things out of our heads, put them on the table in front of us, and share them, share our assumptions, other people can find the mistakes that we've made, collaborate. Really, the kind of the bandwidth of communication that you can have with somebody when you have, instead of just an idea in your head, a model that's running on the table is just profound. And when people work together on a model to, you question my assumptions and I say, here's if I did this, you say, have you thought about that, et cetera. That kind of collaboration going into something that's again, has to actually function and run and produce a result is a really powerful way to kind of level up and get a deeper and more thorough understanding of the system. And I think really as a tool for just getting work done and understanding the world, we've barely scratched the surface with simulation. Another really valuable thing about simulation is the fact that it compresses time. And in the case of something like global climate change, it's decades in the future before major consequences happen, and it's really hard to look at that when you've got the immediacy in front of you of economic collapse or an outbreak of bird flu or whatever. And so the ability to take a model and just run right to the future quickly and understand where things are going is a really valuable way to kind of get rid of that whole chunk of time which can get in people's way and have people understand what the consequences are of what they're doing. And the final thing that I think really makes simulation powerful is that it's a sandbox in which we can fail safely. We can sit there and try things out. You guys have probably played SimCity. You can unleash earthquakes and tornadoes and Godzilla, and you can just wreak havoc on something and understand what's going on. And you can also propose solutions and figure out, okay, let's try this, and look for the unintended consequences, at the interesting opportunities where you might not have been expecting something to be there. And finally, just by doing something, you learn, and you learn in a fundamental way. It's more like practice than studying. And it's something that you can internalize and draw upon a lot more freely than a lot of other kinds of knowledge. So again, these are a lot of the reasons why I've spent so much time doing different things in simulation. And when models are comprehensible to non-experts, when they're broadly accessible on all sorts of platforms, when they're well visualized, when they have engaging interaction, that's the definition of games. And I have Sim Life up here. That's a game that I happen to have developed a long time ago. And Sim Life was, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a model of evolution and ecosystems. It's an agent-based model with individual plants and animals. Back when I developed it, computers were about, I don't know, at least 1,000 times slower, maybe 10,000 times slower. So it's kind of interesting as we get into higher levels of computation and more data, the things you can do today. But it's still, even though it was designed on such a slow platform, it really surprised me how much it did. I just put the simplest dynamics of evolution in there, for example, and I got out evolutionary dynamics, or the model provided evolutionary dynamics, which I didn't even understand. In fact, I often thought they were bugs. And I went up to Stanford and talked to some evolutionary biologist there, and I said, what's going on here? And he's like, oh, that's an evolutionary sustainable strategy. That's exactly what should be happening. And so for me to have something that I create things that are correct, that I don't even understand, kind of speaks to the power of this medium to really help us understand new things and kind of raise our level of discourse and knowledge around things. I want to talk about just a little bit of a cautionary tale as well. Like computational powers we've been talking about is just increasing by orders of magnitude, obviously. We're in an era of big data where we have all sorts of information available that was never available before. We have ubiquitous access to it. And I kind of see us entering the era of big sim. There's a lot of people who want to simulate everything. They want to, down to every individual person in the world, every individual this or that. And it's a noble aspiration, and I think it comes from a lot of us who read the Foundation trilogy when we were kids. And this concept of psychohistory, that we can predict the future of what every individual is going to do. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this guy invented this science, and I think if I remember right, he had things locked up in a vault, and maybe every 10 years or something, or maybe it wasn't even on a particular schedule, the vault would unlock, and it would give some little nugget of wisdom about what people should do to solve the problem du jour. So that's a wonderful science fiction story and a total fantasy. We can't put too much faith in simulation. You can't do that kind of stuff. You can't, and primarily you can't predict people. And believe me, I've tried. Ted was referring to this company, Decision Power, where we modeled consumer behavior and marketing. And there's a place where there was a high economic reward for getting the right answer. There was tons of data. And still, ultimately, I mean, our brains are, 10 billion neurons. They have 10,000 connections each. And it's just a system, to really get to predict. If you want to simulate a bridge or an integrated circuit, you need to model it with a system that's more complex than the thing you're modeling. We don't currently have a way to do that with brains yet, so we can't predict people. The other thing to be careful of about simulation is that even if you have a model that's perfectly accurate and perfectly predictive, you have externalities that you can't control. And so what you really have is I've got this point today where I understand everything, and I've got some model, let's say it's a good model, and it develops this kind of cone of uncertainty that goes out in the future as more and more things can happen that I don't understand. And so when you're using a model, you need to think about not just the one right answer, but what are the basins of attraction where the system can go? What can, there's major areas where a system is likely to draw itself into, and it's good to know what those are, but you can't know which one you're going to go into necessarily. What you can do when you have a good model is you can build a strategy that is robust against a portfolio of possible futures. It's kind of like retirement planning. You say, I don't know exactly what the interest rate is going to be, but it could be this or this or this or this. And I have some strategies that fail in a lot of those situations. I have other strategies that are really robust, but maybe they don't all give me the maximum outcome in the best scenario. But that's the real way to use simulation. The other thing to do is to keep measuring, and there's this cone of uncertainty, right? And at some point you're here in time, and then you're here in time, and you can actually measure things again, and you can kind of check your knowledge with the model. So enough about simulation. I now want to dive into Footprint USA. It's an app that I've created. It's available for free on the App Store for iOS. And it's been a spare time project for me, and it's focused around sustainability. I'm trying to meld the two things that I really feel passionate about. One is the power of simulation for people, and the other is how we can make a better future, in short. So I'm just going to, again, dive to into the simulator here, and I'm not getting the full screen, so that'll be interesting to see what happens here. Oh, there we go. So the aspect ratio is a little squashed, but we can live with that. So basically, what Footprint USA is, there is a simulation model in there, and it's a holistic collection of both models and just basic information and visualization of all the major systems that kind of influence. If you think about US from a sustainability perspective in terms of environment, resources, people's behavior, and the consequences of it. So there's tons of data from all sorts of areas from the government, like the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Census Bureau, agricultural data, the Energy Information Administration. There's a lot of foundations like the Pew Foundation or Robert Wood Johnson Foundation who do things like the County Health Survey. Just a whole variety of information sources. And one of the things that I did with the app was to pull all those different data sources, tens of gigabytes, into a small set that's kind of harmonized. So it's looking at the same time scale, the same space scale, et cetera, to try to present a very, it's a sketch. It's not a super high resolution photograph, but of of the overall system of the U.S. and just dive into a few things. So there's a geographic aspect where you can look at things like climate and waterways, just the various natural resources that we have, et cetera. There's system level views of things. So for example, and this is a real mess if you just look at it as a single chart, but if you look at this, is I call it the industrial ecosystem. So the materials and how they move through it to produce other things. And there's a big database that talks about the flow of materials. And it's interesting to look at these things and find things out like the thing that we move the most is coal. It's kind of interesting. If you look at just ton miles of stuff moved, it's coal. And so if you think about the cost of moving materials, you know, these kinds of interfaces can help you see things that might not have been really obvious initially. Let's see, this data comes from the, I'm trying to remember. I mean, it all comes from the government, and which specific government source, I don't recall off the top of my head right now. But I could look that up later. There's actually, you can find out with the app, there's an interactive guide, which basically does tell you about all the different sources of information in there.
Which is the follow-up question, which is interesting.
That,
It's the follow-up, the attribution being available.
yes, yes, the attribution of all the data is available in here. And I'm sure I've got some things wrong and I've misinterpreted them. And again, the idea of models and visualization and sharing technologies to get other people to help contribute and make it better. Looking at from say the household perspective of how we use resources, you know, for example, if we look at energy use, we can see that the purple here is transportation. Most of the energy we use at home is for travel. If we look at the bigger context of things, so this is how much energy. This is talking about how much energy a household uses, and we can move out to look at how much energy is used in the entire economy based on everything that needs to be created to produce what we consume as a household. So there's lots of things you can explore in here data-wise. What I really want to do is talk about the simulation part of it and some of the things I've learned from using the simulation and from developing it and from what other people have kind of pointed out. The first thing I learned, which actually ultimately didn't have a lot to do with the simulation, but it was rather surprising to me, was where the most sustainable place in the United States is from a resource perspective. And it might be surprising, but I've got a picture of it here. Essentially, this is New York City, and if you think in terms of resource use, I mean, people live in small apartments, and they don't have a lot of stuff, so they don't pull a lot of material through the economy to help make the stuff. They don't have backyards. They're not watering lawns. A lot of people don't have cars. There's a ton of things that really make it amazingly sustainable, and it's surprising. And it's also relatively high quality of life because there's such a concentration of people. You have such a concentration of talent. And so education opportunities, healthcare, and everything are actually really high. And it kind of looks like an ugly place to live, but they do actually have a nice park there. And but the one thing that I want to really convey with this is that a lot of things can surprise us. And one of the things, like the fact that living in dense cities is actually highly sustainable is totally counter to what a lot of people think of in terms of, oh, I should be in Vermont, you know, organically churning my goat milk butter and driving my Prius to the farmer's market. So the first thing,
for full disclosure, what car do you drive?
I have an electric Ford Focus. So yes, electric cars are great, provided they're not powered by dirty fuel. So I just wanted to bring that out as a surprise. Now I'm going to dive into the software a little bit and do a few experiments. So we're just talking about transportation. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go to the simulation aspect of it, and make sure it's centered on the screen. So let's look at the energy flow in the United States. So this basically summarizes everything that I was able to pull together about energy, and you'll find similar diagrams like this online. This one's actually somewhat interactive, where you can pick particular regions and look at the energy use there. But I want to focus on transportation. So it's where most of our oil goes, and it's tremendously inefficient in terms of how much goes to heat. So this is, you know, an area that's really ripe for doing something. And the something that it seems to make a lot of sense to do is to drive electric cars. So that was one of the first questions that drove me to do this. Like, what should I buy an electric car? Does that make sense? So we can simply do the experiment here. What if most, oops, I always forget I have to create a new scenario first. What if most of us drove electric cars? Let's take a look. So we find we have this sustainability meter here. And again, inside the app, it talks about how the score is derived. It's a combination of resource usage and the quality of life you get out. So fossil fuel use has gone way down, which is great. Electricity use has gone up, of course. And CO2 hasn't changed much, which, when you think about it, of course, because you still have to produce the electricity. It's just produced somewhere else. I should say that the fuel is just burned someplace else instead of in the car. What you can do then is say, great, well, let's talk about sustainable energy. Let's go ahead and have a lot of solar and wind. And then we find things get a lot better. Obviously, the CO2 gets better. Atmospheric waste decreases, which helps increase health, which is improving a little bit here. A lot of things start happening. Commodity use goes down. At the highest level, yes. I don't have all the individual things now. If you just decrease car consumption, which resources are used less? I just kind of it's a very broad brush at the moment, but there are many ways to take this model further, but that is an impact. So that's transportation. Let's talk about food for a minute. Again, we have a chart kind of showing where a lot of food goes. And one of the interesting things is, I should say where a lot of crops goes. I'm just going to go back and I'm going to make a scenario here. How many people have kind of heard the phrase eat local? Yeah, it's pretty, it feels like a good thing to do. Like we're not wasting all our energy making this food have to travel from where it's grown to where it's consumed. And so that's another thing I was curious about. Does this really matter? So I went ahead and pulled data, and again, the sources are referenced in the app. And I said, okay, let's say we eat twice as much local as we thought we did. What does it look like? And you probably couldn't tell this meter actually moved down a little bit rather than up, which is kind of interesting. But it turns out, like, if you eat local, you have to grow food where it's not best suited to grow. And in general, it's first of all, it doesn't save a lot of energy. There's not a lot of energy spent in transporting food. And there's a lot of negative things that come from trying to get everything you want from an environment where it might not be the ideal place to grow it. So then I thought,
I have a question. So you've got this is a model here, right?
Yes.
So how do you determine the functional forms or the parameters in there?
So what I've done is basically pulled relationships that I saw from the data that was available. And well, for some things, that's where I pull those relationships from. In general, I just put sort of simple linear relationships for most things, or maybe they're linear and asymptotic out at the edges. But and I would look for studies of.
So it sounds like although these are technically quantitative models, you really only trust the qualitative effects.
Yes, absolutely so. This again, it's think of this as a sketch, not a photograph. And there's a way to take this a lot further. And one of the reasons I wanted to put this out there is to obviously raise these questions and hopefully energize people to want to take this further. So another thing about agriculture is that fertilizer is very energy intensive. So I was curious, like, okay, so what if we use less fertilizer? How can that impact things? And so our score actually got a tiny bit worse again. And one of the actual things, and again, I made up this score, and there's probably bugs in the model, but from a directional standpoint, I think a lot of these things actually have a significant amount of merit to them. With less fertilizer, we need to use more land. And we use more land. We obviously grow things on the best land for growing things, and what's left over is not so great. So once you start growing things on land that's not so great, you need a lot more inputs to grow them. And so actually, fertilizer is not a bad thing. It uses energy, but the alternative is that it takes more resources to get what we need. So this whole food conundrum, what do we do about it? How can we get some leverage? And going back to this diagram here, one of the most amazing things was that, look at the wasted section here. 40% of the food that's produced in the United States is wasted. 40%. And half of that is wasted at the point of consumption, whether that's in home or restaurants. So when I learned about that, I said, okay, well, let's put a food waste parameter in there as well. So I'm just going to reset these other things. And let's say we waste half as much food. Let's say we can cut out all the waste at the home and restaurants, which is a little optimistic. Helps a little bit. We start growing less crops and less water use and so on. Another thing that if you look at the overall diagram here is meat. So in order to feed meat, you have to produce all this food here, which is like actually a little bit larger than the total amount of food wasted. And it's large in proportion to the amount of food we eat overall. So to get a calorie of animal protein, you need about 5 to 10 calories of plant energy. So suppose that we eat less meat. So we have a diet thing here, and we can just dial down the meat. And I should say not all meat is equal. There's a lot more sustainable things you can do with raising fish and sustainable aquaculture systems than cattle. But in general, like things get a lot better. So I love a good steak. In-N-Out Burger is one of my favorite places to go. So I don't know what to say about this, but eating less meat is a valuable thing to think about doing. So the point of this model is really, one more thing I want to talk about with crops, biofuels. So there's a mandate in the overall government sustainability, whatever, that Obama talked about recently, which is to increase biofuel usage. And this has been happening for a while. And I think the target is like 27% of vehicle fuel should be biofuel derived by, let's say, 2050, 2025. I don't remember the exact year. Let's see, actually, let's look at the energy thing first. And presently, we're a little tiny slice. There's not a ton of, it's significant, but it's more than electrical, which you can't even see on this chart. But if we look at biofuel, it's a big deal in terms of you have to grow crops. And so what's the impact of biofuels? That's another thing I was really curious about. So I'm just going to create a new scenario here to start with a clean slate. And this is personal travel. So okay, let's say we want to get to the roughly, does that look like maybe 25%? A little high. Biofuel. And again, I didn't put numbers on a lot of these things on purpose because the model is so coarse. I don't want people reading too much precision into it. Okay, so biofuels are a really bad deal. Land use goes up, energy use goes up because you need to use more fertilizer, water use goes up, pesticide use means there's more hazardous waste occurring. And in general, biofuels are a really, really bad idea. And this is, again, there may be bugs in the model, but I think directionally this is a pretty clear indication. Yes?
Taking oil from, I don't know, In-N-Out Burger or something like that, or using sugarcane biofuel rather than corn biofuel.
So it's a good point. Biofuels can come from a lot of sources. There's the kind of food crop derived biofuel, and that's the thing that I'm particularly harshing on here. But there's a lot of work.
Cellulosic, right? That stuff's made from carbohydrates, and then the cellulosic stuff is made from grass and corn husks and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the cellulosic biofuel still, you still have to grow it, and that's it usually requires some inputs, and those inputs have a cost. And then you don't process that stuff for free. There's energy that goes into processing the cellulosic. No one's been able to crack that one yet in terms of making that energy efficient. It might happen. And there's things like algae is another way to generate biofuels. So yeah, there may be a case where it does end up being a great solution. But personally, I think if we look at the scenario of renewable energy and electric vehicles, that's really where I think from the big picture we should be putting our efforts. And really, that kind of it really comes down to two things when you look at the overall scenario of that's really an oblate spheroid on that screen there. Comes down to two things when you think about sustainability. One is essentially consuming fewer atoms, and another is using renewable energy. Actually, I forgot to, on the subject of consuming fewer atoms, I do want to just show you one quick scenario there. So that's another area which is really, when we go back to this big rat's nest that was the kind of industrial ecosystem here, and how when you get a plastic drinking straw at you know, the local fast food restaurant, what had to happen to get that straw to your table. There's a ton of inefficiency in there. I mean, for every, let's see, I think I have, yeah, 22.8 ton miles per person per day of stuff is moved throughout the whole industrial ecosystem. That's just massage. On the behalf of every one of you in this room, there's 22.8 tons of stuff being moved a mile today. So what, and to really understand what the impact is, I modeled discretionary consumption. So this is not like talking about, like, if I bring the slider down for less discretionary consumption, that doesn't mean we live like huddled in a cave over our, you know, I don't know, electric heaters or something. It's really the stuff that we can do without if we move away from, you know, doing excessive consumption. And again, there's more details in the documentation that comes with this about the assumptions behind this. But let's see, I probably shouldn't do this on top of the other scenario. Let me just create one more scenario here. Okay, so if we just bring consumption down, it makes a huge impact in sustainability. You use less stuff, takes less energy to make it, you generate less solid waste, and there's all these other, you know, you don't need as big a house. You don't have to maintain all the stuff that you have. You don't have to work as long to buy as much stuff. I mean, you know, it's just it's really a positive feedback in terms of what can happen when we decrease consumption. And it's not, of course, that's not consistent with like a forever growing economy of you know, selling atoms to each other, but that can only last for so long anyway. So going back to, and I wanted to make that point because really there's two things that matter. One is how much stuff we use, and the other is how we produce energy. So let's say that we buy into it and we say, great, let's do renewable energy. What do we need to do? So there was a real interesting, there's a book called The Conundrum that talked about this, and the calculation that the author did said, suppose that we want to limit CO2 to 450 parts per billion, which is consistent with a 2 degree C change in temperature. What would we need to do? So the first thing we need to do is like stop, no more increase in global energy consumption, despite the fact that the population is increasing to, you know, 9 billion, 7 billion people, 9 billion people who want a middle class life. Let's say we can do that. We can just stop energy consumption. What do we need to do? So to do that, you calculated you need to do all of this. Essentially every week, you know, another 35 gigawatt nuclear power plant, every 8 hours, 100 megawatts of geothermal. I mean, it doesn't have to be this exact recipe, but the point is, like, the infrastructure change to achieve this is just, you know, massive. You know, it makes the moonshot look like a tiny little walk in the park in comparison. And to achieve this, we'd have to continue all this for the next 25 years. So what do we do? That's the million, the billion, the $1 trillion question. I'm not sure. I mean, the good news is that you know, we do have the power to make the future what we want, and this gets back to the Occupy movement. I mean, it's really up to us as individuals to say, hey, let's build a cohesive and coherent vision. Yeah, these problems are hard, but it's not like it violates the laws of physics. It's not like we can't decrease consumption. It's not like we can't start working towards renewable energy. Maybe we can't hit the 2 degree C target. But there's a lot of things we can do. The first step is to really disengage with the culture of consumption. I mean, think about your information diet, how you're learning about things, and this is probably a pretty enlightened audience. I'd imagine that you've got a pretty good information diet already. But in general, I mean, some of the sacred cows that I talked about, eating local, biofuels, you know, when you look at what the whole system and really understand it, and again, this speaks to the power of simulation, I believe, when you can like play these what-if experiments. You find out that these things that sounded really cool and, you know, get a lot of marketing buzz aren't necessarily the right things to do. But they serve the interest of the people who want to sell you more stuff. By full disclosure, I work for a company that likes to sell people stuff, Amazon. Buying stuff is a good thing. We need it. But you know, in general, we need a lot less of it than we use. And these are just some resources that I found especially helpful. The Conundrum was the book I mentioned where they talk about this energy calculation. A really wonderful book is from the World Watch Institute. Their 2013 report is Sustainability Still Possible. The amount of data available now, you go on data.gov where my starting point for much of the data that I pulled in, it's just an amazing resource. There's a place called the Center for the New American Dream, which is focused on living a more sustainable lifestyle in general. So, I mean, you got to go out and seek out the unspun reality. That's the first step. Take back your mind. The second step is to work to build a unified vision of where we want to go. I thought this was a fun, beautiful picture that I found online. I don't know that that's the vision, floating cities. But in order, if we're going to have any kind of like countervailing force to the special interest-driven thing that helps corporations survive, we as individuals need to get together and collectively decide what we want. And ways you can do that, share what you learn with other people. Help make better models. Help make this one better. Help make something that obsoletes it. And we need to take these models and explore the space of possible futures and decide where we want to go. Do we want to eat meat or not? Do we want sustainable energy? Do we want to, are we happy living in dense cities? We have to really talk about these issues and figure out where we want to go. And with the app I created, Footprint USA, I mean, it's really a first step along the way, and a ton more needs to be done. It needs to be collaborative. The model needs to be a lot deeper. We need to add time to the model to understand how to look at the resource consumption rate in order to make these changes, like switch to sustainable energy. The model should be global instead of just focused on the U.S. Should be more broadly accessible instead of just an iOS application. It should be something that's on the web and everybody can use. I mean, there's a lot more to do. And I just wanted to really, with this, plant the seed, get people thinking, look for people who are interested in collaborating and have more ideas. The third step, the final step is, go out and make it happen. Yes. Oh, drop ball.
But you can go ahead, Martin. Okay. One of your last comments was that the model ought to be global. So I work a lot in Asia Pacific region, and thinking about your presentation, which is great, is that there are so many hundreds of millions of people, perhaps billions, wanting the American dream, particularly in Asia, who are driving in that direction, most of whom, it seems to me, don't particularly get too energized about the long-term future, and are more interested in quarterly results and their own improvement in terms of their economic situation. How do we deal with that?
I wish I had the answer. I think that's a real challenge that we've kind of, as the United States grew up in a time when we could kind of spend our environmental venture capital on getting more stuff, and everybody looks at that and says, oh, we want that too. We want cars. We want to eat meat. We want to have this lifestyle, and it just flat out isn't sustainable. I mean, there's just fundamental hard limits. But as far as how you shift people's aspirations, that's a great question. I mean, and I would say the media, the advertising industry has been able, there's a whole big science, and I spent a bunch of time when I was doing the company Decision Power in this, of creating mindset about what to do. And so it is possible. I mean, the whole culture of consumption came because, in post-World War II, we needed to, keep the industrial capacity utilized, and so people kind of got into the cycle of buying new things all the time. And if it could be generated in the first place, I'm sure it can be shifted in the other direction. It's as huge an effort, I'm sure, as switching to renewable energy. But I don't know that there's an option. That's not a great answer, I know.
So I don't know if my thing will be actually a question or a diatribe. You mentioned the Foundation series, and I was reflecting on, I've read those a couple of times. You say we're not violating the laws of physics, but we definitely will be violating the laws of psychohistory in the following sense. There is no mechanism we currently have in the world, other than maybe religion, to motivate a large number of people to do something over a large amount of time. Think about ZPG. War is a consequence of religion, right? But think about zero population growth. That was a really cool movement that really was thinking about addressing one of the underlying things. Didn't sustain, right? Except in China. Absolutely. So the point is, democracy seems to be the thing that works against the ability to have global plans of this kind. You think about the Hunger Project, which was another really good idea that could have made a difference, and you can't get people around it. So back to your question, will an advertising campaign work against the interests of the people who have the money to run an advertising campaign?
Yeah,
They're running
so
into the question.
there are a whole bunch of interesting things that you talked about there. And the last one is the one that sticks in my mind at the moment. And I don't mean to be so glib as to say, oh yeah, it's just an advertising campaign. That wasn't it at all. It is all about persuasion. And you know, one of the things that I guess you can say in a sort of dark humor sort of way that we have in our favor is that climate change is happening. The sea levels are rising. The ice caps are melting. Everybody can see that. So finally, it's not just this like hypothetical thing. Oh no, that's just your science. It's not the real science. This is really happening. There's going to be island nations that are going to be underwater. There's going to be things that you just can't ignore. And people can say, I don't care. I want my lifestyle. But push is going to come to shove, and change is going to have to happen. Yeah, I mean, if we had like a tenth the number of people on the planet, then things would be fine again for a while.
I'm thinking
right?
about getting to a more concrete direction in the conversation for a few
Sure,
minutes.
sure.
As I was watching your simulation, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing with some very nice visualizations, and I really enjoying it. I'm struck with the question that came from Pat actually is, what is this data come from? How do I know? And what are your algorithms underneath?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying only to be skeptical. I'm just saying that what do you have ideas about how to make this thing trustworthy? I have a conversation with a friend that knows that the ice caps are going away, and he says it doesn't have to do with people. So he's going to be very careful to look at your algorithms
Yes.
and your data sources.
Yeah, it is essential for these models to be transparent. And in this first version, I think in terms of like a wiki simulation where anybody can look at the models underneath. I couldn't pull it off in one fell swoop doing all these things. But that is essential because you have to really be able to examine the assumptions, the equations, and go and ultimately you're going to find that there's things that you just don't agree about, and then you can go off and maybe do some experiments to try to figure out which one's right. But yes, it needs to be transparent. The man with the ball.
Okay. So actually I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
So question one is, so I've done some work in sub-Saharan Africa, and those are places where, so in contrast to the United States, which is a rich source of...
By the way, do you guys know that there's actually a microphone inside that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if other people can hear you.
So, it's like I've done some work particularly in Kenya, and so the question I have is that so in places in other countries in the world that don't have the resources, the governments don't have the resources to collect the rich amount of data that you're based on here. How do you solve that? How do you make some meaningful models based on that?
Yeah, that was another thing that really I had to step back from doing the whole globe because first of all the data set is not consistently available, and there's a whole bunch of other problems that come up when you look at the whole globe. There's mass starvation, there's despotism, there's a number of things, severe lack of resources in certain regions.
Yeah.
So
is there anything that you can, any way that you possibly approach that with?
I think he's not going to solve.
Yeah, I know. But, right.
Well,
there's a lot of people working. I actually have a brother that's putting weather stations all over Africa, people are working on that. And then there's the other method, which is that people are making, I know somebody got a master's degree for making a model that was 10 times better at predicting rain, given that it didn't have the data that we expect. So I think that those are a whole other.
yeah, and
Okay.
to some degree, people are people, and it's been shown in culture after culture when you increase education, fertility goes down, for example. So there are levers that are well known. You're smiling, is that not true?
It sounds like a Freakonomics kind of thing.
No, well,
There you
Well,
go.
there is that. Oh, I get it. This is Carnegie Mellon. That's what we're talking about here. What I meant was, as women become more educated and empowered, and they can take control of their fertility, women never want tons of kids. Well, I shouldn't make a global statement like that. It's usually not a woman's choice to have as many kids as developing nations have. And so I put my foot in it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop digging.
Okay, so question number 2 is, and I claim no expertise in this area at all, but just looking at the simulations that you've run, it seems like this would also be a good tool with a switch of back-end data for supply chain management. So something a little less macro, maybe help industry or corporation or group of corporations better manage their resources at a smaller scale. And so I was wondering if you could give any thought to that.
Yeah, in fact, when I after my sim life days, I wanted to find a way to kind of take multi-agent simulation and make it valuable, like have it find a life of its own beyond games. So I started looking for business applications, and that was actually an area where I looked. And Procter & Gamble actually has done work in using agent-based simulation to do supply chain modeling. That area was actually there was a lot going on there. And so we started looking in the direction of modeling consumer behavior at that point. And it was also kind of like, again, from the psychohistory thing, modeling, how people think was kind of interesting. But absolutely, it's a great tool for that in general.
Other questions? So CMU Silicon Valley, I hate to say, has a lot of students that are enthusiastic about interesting opportunities, and there's the possibility with a great salary supporting a student to do some follow-on or to get involved in some other way in CMU Silicon Valley. So I'm just going to encourage you to learn about practicum, program and other places where people can get involved.
Yeah, I would really love if there's a way. I haven't figured this out yet. Like I said, I kind of wanted to get something out there and go out and meet people and communicate and learn and see what can happen. And I'm sort of like trusting the universe that this is all going to work out. But where this goes next, I mean, it's obviously much bigger than a one-person project. So people who are interested in collaborating, let me know.